Jonathan Hartwell was hiding in his own bathroom at 7 in the morning, pressing a towel against his mouth to muffle the sobs that threatened to tear him apart. Downstairs, his 4-year-old son was eating breakfast. Upstairs, his entire world was collapsing. "Daddy, what color is sad?" That's what Daniel had asked 5 minutes ago. His tiny fingers had reached toward Jonathan's face with the careful precision only a blind child knows, mapping his father's features through touch, trying to understand why his voice sounded different today. Hollow. Broken. "Your voice sounds gray, Daddy." Jonathan had smiled. He'd lied through his teeth, told his son he was just tired from work, kissed the top of that soft blonde head, and fled like a coward to the master bathroom. Now he was sliding down the cold marble wall, chest heaving, drowning in a grief so massive it felt like his ribcage was caving in. His son was asking about colors he would never see, trying to paint emotions in shades of a world locked away from him forever. If you've ever felt helpless watching someone you love suffer, hit that like button and comment where you're watching from. This wasn't supposed to be Jonathan Hartwell's life. He'd conquered Wall Street by 40, built a tech empire worth $3 billion, owned mansions on 3 continents. Presidents took his calls. CEOs courted his investments. He'd made the impossible happen in boardrooms from New York to Singapore. But he couldn't give his son sight. He couldn't reverse the congenital glaucoma that had been detected when Daniel was 9 months old, that aggressive, relentless condition that destroyed his optic nerves before his first birthday. 3 surgeries. 7 specialists from Boston to Berlin. $10 million thrown at experimental treatments that all ended the same way, with doctors avoiding his desperate gaze and murmuring words like irreversible and permanent damage, and the one that felt like a death sentence. Learn to accept it. Jonathan Hartwell had never accepted anything in his life. That's how he built his fortune, by refusing to take no for an answer, by bulldozing through every obstacle until he got what he wanted. But this was different. Every morning for the past 3 years, he'd woken up to his son's laughter and felt his heart split open all over again. Daniel would never see his face. Never watch a sunrise paint the sky. Never look into his father's eyes and see how desperately, how completely he was loved. The mansion, 12,000 square feet of architectural perfection overlooking the Pacific, had become a tomb of failed hopes. 6 nannies hired and fired in 8 months. Jonathan couldn't stand the way they tiptoed around Daniel, speaking in those soft, pitying voices people use around broken things. The careful way they guided him, like he was made of glass. The sadness in their eyes when they thought Jonathan wasn't looking. His ex-wife had left 2 years ago. Packed her bags while Daniel napped and walked out without saying goodbye to either of them. "I can't do this anymore, Jonathan," she'd said on the phone 3 days later, calling from her mother's house in Connecticut. "I can't watch our son live in darkness. I can't watch you kill yourself trying to fix something that can't be fixed. I can't." She'd signed the divorce papers. Waived custody. Sent birthday cards twice a year with generic messages and no return address. So now it was just Jonathan and Daniel. And Jonathan was failing spectacularly. He splashed cold water on his face, avoided his reflection in the mirror, and headed downstairs. The breakfast dishes were still on the table where he'd left them. Daniel was in the living room, playing with his tactile blocks, special toys designed for blind children, each one a different texture and shape. "Daddy?" Daniel's head turned toward the sound of Jonathan's footsteps. The boy's eyes were a beautiful blue. Clear and bright and heartbreakingly useless. Did the sad go away? Jonathan's throat closed. "Yeah, buddy. It went away." "Good." Daniel smiled, that sunshine grin that could level cities. "Ms. Patricia says someone new is coming today. Is she nice?" "Ms. Patricia." The housekeeper. The only staff member Jonathan hadn't fired, mostly because she was 67 and treated him like a stubborn child who needed firm handling. "I don't know yet," Jonathan admitted. But we'll find out. The doorbell rang at exactly 9 o'clock. Jonathan opened it to find a young black woman standing on his doorstep, dressed in simple jeans and a navy sweater. She couldn't have been more than 28, with natural hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that looked right through his billionaire armor to the terrified father underneath. "Mr. Hartwell." Her voice was steady, warm. "I'm Grace Robinson. I'm here about the nanny position." He'd almost canceled this interview. Almost sent Ms. Patricia a text saying he'd changed his mind, that he'd handle Daniel's care himself like he'd been doing for the past 3 weeks since firing the last nanny. But something in Grace's application had caught his attention, a single line in her cover letter that read, "I don't believe in fixing children. I believe in seeing them. Come in." Jonathan stepped aside, suddenly aware of how empty the house felt. How quiet. Grace walked into the foyer, her gaze sweeping over the vaulted ceilings, the crystal chandelier, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. She didn't gasp. Didn't comment on the wealth on display. Instead, she turned to Jonathan and asked, "Where's your son?" "Living room. He's playing with tactile blocks," Grace finished, tilting her head. "I can hear him. He's building something. A tower, maybe." Jonathan blinked. "How did you?" "The sound. Each block makes a different noise when it's placed." Grace's expression softened. "You learn to pay attention to things like that when you spend time with blind children." Something in Jonathan's chest loosened. Just slightly. "You've worked with blind children before." "I've spent time with them." Grace's jaw tightened, just for a moment. "I know what it's like." Before Jonathan could ask what that meant, Daniel's voice rang out from the living room. "Daddy? Is that the new person? What does she sound like?" Grace's face transformed. She moved toward the living room without asking permission, and Jonathan found himself following her. Daniel was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, surrounded by his blocks, his head tilted in that listening posture that broke Jonathan's heart every single time. Grace knelt down on the floor, at Daniel's level. "Hi, Daniel. My name is Grace. Your dad's right, I'm the new person. And I think I sound like, What do you think? What do I sound like to you?" Daniel's face scrunched up in concentration. "Like, yellow. Warm yellow. Like when Daddy lets me sit in the sun spot by the window." Grace smiled. Actually smiled, like this was the most delightful thing she'd ever heard. "I like that. Yellow's my favorite color." "Mine too." Daniel's whole face lit up. "Even though I can't see it, I can feel it. It's warm and happy." "That's exactly what it is," Grace said softly. Then she did something that made Jonathan's breath catch. She took Daniel's small hand and placed it on her own face, guiding his fingers along her cheekbones, her nose, her smile. "This is what I look like, if you want to know." Daniel's fingers traced her features with gentle curiosity. "You have a nice smile. I can feel it. Are you going to stay?" "That's up to your dad," Grace said, but she looked straight at Jonathan when she said it. "But I'd like to. If he'll let me." Jonathan should have conducted a proper interview. Should have asked about her qualifications, her references, her experience. Should have been the careful, controlled businessman who never made decisions based on gut instinct. Instead, he heard himself say, "When can you start?" "Now," Grace replied. "If you need me." And God help him, he did. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Grace moved through the house like she'd always belonged there, learning Daniel's routines, his preferences, the way he organized his world through sound and touch. She didn't pity him. Didn't treat him like he was fragile. She just saw him. Really saw him, in a way no one else had since his diagnosis. By evening, Daniel was laughing, actually laughing, at something Grace was teaching him about identifying birds by their songs. Jonathan stood in the doorway of the living room, watching them, feeling something unfamiliar uncurl in his chest. Hope. Dangerous, terrifying hope. If this story is hitting you right where it hurts, don't forget to subscribe and comment below where you're watching from. That night, after Daniel was in bed, Jonathan headed to his study to catch up on emails. The house was quiet. Grace had mentioned she'd stay late to familiarize herself with the kitchen, make sure she knew where everything was for tomorrow's breakfast. He was halfway through a contract review when he heard it. Singing. A woman's voice, low and melodic, singing in a language Jonathan didn't recognize. The sound was coming from upstairs. From Daniel's room. Jonathan's heart lurched. He took the stairs 2 at a time, moving as quietly as he could. Daniel's door was cracked open. Soft light spilled into the hallway. Jonathan peered inside and froze. Grace was kneeling beside Daniel's bed. His son was lying down, eyes closed, breathing slow and peaceful. And Grace had her hands pressed gently over the boy's closed eyes, her lips moving in words Jonathan couldn't understand. Words that sounded ancient. Sacred. The air in the room felt thick with something Jonathan couldn't name. Something that made his chest tighten and his throat close and his hands shake. She was praying. Or chanting. Or something. Whatever it was, it looked like healing. Grace's eyes opened. Met Jonathan's across the dark room. And in that moment, Jonathan saw something in her expression that made his blood run cold and his hope flare white-hot all at once. She believed. She actually believed his son could be saved. "What?" Jonathan whispered, his voice barely audible, "are you doing?" Grace didn't move her hands. Didn't stop what she was doing. She just looked at him with those steady, knowing eyes and said something that changed everything. "What the doctors won't, Mr. Hartwell. I'm treating his soul." And Jonathan Hartwell, billionaire, empire builder, man who'd never believed in anything he couldn't see or control, felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Because for the first time in 3 years, someone was telling him there was still hope. But who was Grace Robinson? And what exactly did she think she could do for a boy the entire medical world had given up on? Jonathan stood frozen in the doorway, watching Grace's hands hover over his son's closed eyes. The room felt electric, charged with something he couldn't name. "What the doctors won't, Mr. Hartwell," Grace said softly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm treating his soul." His soul. Jonathan's voice came out strangled. "My son doesn't need spiritual healing. He needs medical intervention. Science. Not, whatever this is." Grace slowly removed her hands from Daniel's face. The boy was sleeping peacefully, his breathing steady and deep. She stood, moving away from the bed with quiet grace, gesturing for Jonathan to follow her into the hallway. Once the door was pulled nearly closed, Grace turned to face him. "Your son has been seen by 7 specialists. You've spent $10 million. 3 surgeries. And where has all that science gotten you, Mr. Hartwell?" The words hit like physical blows. Jonathan's jaw clenched. "That's not fair. It's not about fair." Grace's expression softened, but her voice remained firm. "It's about what Daniel needs. And right now, he needs someone who believes there's more to healing than what shows up on an MRI. So what, you're some kind of faith healer?" Suspicion crept into Jonathan's tone. "Is that what I just walked in on? Some kind of prayer ritual?" "I come from a family of holistic practitioners," Grace said carefully. "My grandmother was a healer. She taught me that the body, mind, and soul are connected. You can't treat one without addressing the others." Jonathan wanted to fire her on the spot. Wanted to escort her out of his house and never look back. But something stopped him. The memory of Daniel's face earlier that day, lit up with genuine joy for the first time in months. "I don't believe in any of that," he said flatly. "You don't have to." Grace held his gaze. "But Daniel does. And maybe that's enough. The next 3 weeks unfolded in ways Jonathan couldn't have predicted. Grace transformed the mansion's back garden into what she called a tactile sanctuary, raised beds filled with herbs that Daniel could touch and smell, wind chimes that created patterns of sound he could map, textured pathways that taught him spatial awareness through his feet. She introduced audio therapy sessions, playing recordings of nature sounds and asking Daniel to identify each element. Rain on leaves. Wind through grass. A hawk's distant cry. She sang to him in that strange, melodic language. Later, she'd explained it was a dialect from her grandmother's village, words meant to soothe and center. And Daniel thrived. He laughed more. Moved with growing confidence. Started asking questions about the world that went beyond colors and sight. But Jonathan's mother didn't see it that way. "She's manipulating you," Eleanor Hartwell said over the phone, her voice sharp with disapproval. "You don't know anything about this woman, Jonathan. Where she came from. What she really wants." "She's helping Daniel," Jonathan countered, pacing his study. For the first time in years, he's actually happy. Happy isn't the same as healed. His mother's tone turned cold. "That woman is filling his head with false hope. And yours too, apparently. Have you even done a proper background check?" Jonathan had. Of course he had. Grace Robinson, 28, no criminal record, previous employment with 2 families in the past 5 years. References had checked out. Everything looked clean. But his mother's words planted seeds of doubt. If you're hooked on this story, hit that like and subscribe button now. Then his business partner called. Marcus Chen, no relation to the original name Jonathan had almost been given, met him for lunch at their usual spot downtown. They'd built the company together 15 years ago, survived 2 recessions and a hostile takeover attempt. Marcus knew Jonathan better than almost anyone. "I'm worried about you," Marcus said bluntly, cutting into his steak. "This nanny. Grace. Something doesn't add up." Jonathan's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What are you talking about?" "I had my guy do a deeper dive. There are gaps in her employment history. Big ones. 2 years where she doesn't show up anywhere. No tax records. No employment. Nothing." The food suddenly tasted like ash. "People take time off. For 2 years. Marcus leaned forward. "Jonathan, listen to me as your friend, not your business partner. This woman shows up out of nowhere, claims she can help your son when every doctor has said it's impossible, and now you're letting her live in your house. What if she's running some kind of long con? What if she's exploiting your desperation?" "She's not," Jonathan started, but the words died in his throat. Because wasn't that exactly what desperate people told themselves? That this time would be different. That this person was genuine. That hope wasn't just another word for self-deception. That night, Jonathan did something he wasn't proud of. He waited until Grace went downstairs to prepare Daniel's nighttime snack, then slipped into the guest room where she stayed. Her belongings were minimal. A small suitcase. Some clothes in the closet. A few books on the nightstand, texts on childhood development, sensory integration therapy, something called Holistic Approaches to Visual Impairment. But in the bottom drawer of the nightstand, tucked beneath a folded sweater, he found a photograph. A little girl. Maybe 5 or 6 years old. Dark skin, bright smile, eyes that didn't quite focus on the camera. Blind. Jonathan's hands shook as he turned the photo over. On the back, written in faded ink, "My angel, Maya. Forever 6. The breath left his lungs in a rush. Grace had lost a child. A blind child. The bedroom door opened behind him. Jonathan spun around, the photo still in his hand. Grace stood in the doorway, her face draining of color. "What are you doing in my room? Who is this?" Jonathan held up the photograph, his voice rough. "Who is Maya?" Grace's eyes welled with tears. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she stepped inside and closed the door. "My daughter," she whispered. She was my daughter. The story came out in broken pieces. Maya, born with congenital cataracts. Surgery at 3 months old that went wrong. Complete blindness by her first birthday. Grace, a single mother working 2 jobs, desperate to give her daughter every chance. "I tried everything," Grace said, her voice cracking. "Traditional medicine. Alternative treatments. I found this clinic. They said they were pioneering a new approach. Experimental but promising. I signed the consent forms. I thought I was saving her." "What happened?" Jonathan asked, though part of him already knew. "The treatment triggered an infection. Sepsis. She was gone in 72 hours. Grace sank onto the edge of the bed, shoulders shaking. "I killed my daughter, Mr. Hartwell. I was so desperate to fix her that I made a choice that took her from me forever. The room felt too small, the air too thick." "That's why you're here," Jonathan said slowly. "You're trying to, what? Get a second chance? Redeem yourself through my son?" "No." Grace looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here because I learned something from losing Maya. I learned that not everything broken needs to be fixed. Some things just need to be accepted. Loved. Supported. And I swore I would never again risk a child's life chasing a cure that might not exist." "Then what were you doing tonight?" Jonathan's voice rose. "With your hands on his face, whispering those words. What are you really doing to my son?" "I'm loving him," Grace said simply. "I'm teaching him that he's whole exactly as he is. That's all. I promise you, Mr. Hartwell. I would never put Daniel in danger. Not after Maya. Never again." Jonathan wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to believe her so badly it hurt. But trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Don't miss what happens next. Like and subscribe right now. He left Grace's room without another word, went downstairs, and found Daniel in the living room, building something elaborate with his blocks. "Daddy." Daniel's face lit up at the sound of his footsteps. "Grace taught me how to build a castle. Want to feel it?" Jonathan knelt beside his son, running his fingers over the tactile blocks arranged in careful patterns. It was beautiful. Intricate. "It's amazing, buddy. Grace says I can make anything I can imagine," Daniel said proudly. "She says being blind doesn't mean I can't see. It just means I see different." Jonathan's throat tightened. He pulled his son close, breathing in the scent of his shampoo, feeling the steady beat of his small heart. That's when he heard the notification ping from his phone. An email. From an address he didn't recognize. No subject line. He opened it with Daniel still in his arms. There was a single photograph attached. It showed Grace standing outside a building, the sign partially visible behind her, Ridge Alternative Medicine Clinic. Below the image, 2 lines of text. This clinic was shut down 3 years ago for unethical practices involving children. Multiple patients died. Ask her what really happened to her daughter. Ask her why she was really there. Jonathan's blood turned to ice. The clinic. The experimental treatment. The daughter who died. What if Grace hadn't been a desperate mother making an impossible choice? What if she'd been part of the problem? He looked down at Daniel, still chattering happily about his block castle, completely unaware that the woman he'd grown to trust might be hiding something far darker than grief. Jonathan's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone again. He needed answers. Real ones. And he needed them before Grace Robinson, whoever she really was, had the chance to hurt his son the way she might have hurt her own. Midnight. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and Jonathan's ragged breathing as he stood outside the kitchen, phone clenched in his fist. The anonymous email glowed accusingly on the screen. Grace was at the sink, washing Daniel's favorite mug, the one with raised dinosaur shapes he could trace with his fingers. She looked peaceful. Normal. Like someone who hadn't potentially destroyed lives. "We need to talk," Jonathan said, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. Grace turned, startled. Then she saw his expression and went very still. "Mr. Hartwell. It's late. Tell me the truth about Ridgecrest Alternative Medicine Clinic." He stepped into the kitchen, holding up his phone with the damning photograph. "Tell me what you really were. Or you're gone by morning." The color drained from Grace's face. The mug slipped from her hands, shattering against the tile floor. Neither of them moved to clean it up. "Where did you get that?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Does it matter?" Jonathan advanced another step. "I know about Maya. I know about the clinic. I know it was shut down for unethical practices. What I don't know is whether you were a victim or part of the problem." Grace's legs seemed to give out. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her hands trembling violently. "You don't understand. Then make me understand." Jonathan's voice cracked with fury and fear. "Because right now, all I see is a woman who lost her daughter under suspicious circumstances, lied about her background, and somehow ended up living in my house with access to my blind son. I didn't lie. You left out 2 years of your life." Jonathan slammed his phone on the counter. 2 years with no employment records, no tax history, nothing. Marcus was right. You're running a con. No. Grace looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I was grieving. I was broken. I couldn't work. I could barely breathe. The clinic, Grace. Tell me about the clinic. If you're on the edge of your seat, like and subscribe now." The story came out in jagged pieces. Maya at age 4, still completely blind, Grace working 3 jobs to afford specialists who all said the same thing: nothing could be done. Then a woman approached her in a hospital waiting room. Professional. Confident. Said she represented a clinic doing revolutionary work with childhood blindness. "She showed me testimonials," Grace said, her voice hollow. "Videos of children who'd regained partial vision. Parents crying tears of joy. I was so desperate, Mr. Hartwell. You have to understand, I would have done anything. So you took Maya there." Grace nodded, wiping at her eyes with shaking hands. "The treatment was experimental. They said it involved stem cell injections combined with electrical stimulation of the optic nerve. It sounded like science. It sounded like hope. But it wasn't. It was butchery." Grace's voice broke completely. "They weren't doctors. Not real ones. The lead practitioner had his license revoked years before. They were preying on desperate parents, charging $50,000 per treatment cycle, giving false hope while performing procedures that were dangerous and unproven." Jonathan felt sick. Maya died there. Not there. 3 days after the first treatment. At home. Grace covered her face with her hands. She spiked a fever. Started seizing. By the time the ambulance arrived, she was unconscious. Septic shock from an infection they introduced during the procedure. She died in my arms in the ER. The kitchen felt too small, the air too thick. Jonathan gripped the counter to steady himself. "The clinic was raided 2 weeks later," Grace continued. "Federal investigation. Turns out 9 other families had similar experiences. 2 other children died. The rest suffered complications. I testified at the trial. Helped put those monsters in prison for 20 years. The photo," Jonathan said slowly. "Why were you there?" "That was taken during my 3rd visit. Before Maya's treatment. Before I knew what they really were." Grace met his eyes, her gaze steady despite the tears. "I was a victim, Mr. Hartwell. Not a perpetrator. I lost my daughter because I trusted the wrong people. Because I was so desperate to fix her that I ignored every warning sign." Jonathan wanted to believe her. But trust required more than tears and explanations. "Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? Would you have hired me?" Grace's laugh was bitter. "If I'd walked in here and said, 'Hi, I'm Grace, my blind daughter died after I took her to a fraudulent medical clinic,' would you have let me near Daniel?" She was right. He wouldn't have. "I came here to help," Grace said quietly. "To honor Maya by making sure another child like her knows he's valued exactly as he is. I swore I'd never again chase false cures or dangerous treatments. That's why everything I do with Daniel is safe. Natural. Just support and love and teaching him to navigate the world with confidence." Jonathan's mind raced. Every moment of the past 3 weeks replaying through a different lens. The tactile garden. The audio therapy. The singing. None of it was medical. None of it promised to restore sight. It was exactly what Grace had said, helping Daniel see himself as whole. "I need proof," Jonathan said finally. "Court documents. Testimony records. Everything. I'll get them." Grace stood on unsteady legs. "I have copies in my room. I keep them to remind myself," her voice cracked. "To remind myself what happens when you chase miracles instead of accepting reality." She left the kitchen. Jonathan stayed frozen, staring at the shattered mug on the floor, tiny dinosaur fragments scattered like broken promises. 5 minutes later, Grace returned with a manila folder. Inside, court transcripts, her witness testimony, newspaper clippings about the clinic's closure, and a death certificate from Maya Robinson, age 6, cause of death, sepsis secondary to medical malpractice. Jonathan read every word. His hands shook. His eyes burned. It was all true. "I'm sorry," he said finally, the words inadequate. "I'm sorry for what happened to Maya. And I'm sorry for accusing you. You were protecting your son." Grace's smile was sad. "I'd have done the same." A sound from upstairs shattered the fragile peace. A cry. High-pitched and terrified. "Daddy!" Both of them ran. Daniel's bedroom door was open, the boy sitting up in bed, tears streaming down his face. "Daniel, what's wrong?" Jonathan was beside him instantly, gathering him close. "I had a bad dream." Daniel's small hands clutched at Jonathan's shirt. "Grace went away. She left like Mommy left. And I couldn't find you. I called and called but nobody came. I'm here, buddy. I'm right here. Where's Grace?" Daniel's voice rose with panic. "Is she gone? Did she leave?" "I'm here too, sweetheart." Grace knelt beside the bed, her voice gentle. "I'm not going anywhere. Don't miss a single moment, hit that subscribe button right now." Daniel reached for her, and Grace took his hand. The boy relaxed immediately, his breathing steadying. "Promise?" Daniel whispered. "Promise you won't leave?" Grace looked at Jonathan. The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Jonathan saw it clearly then, the way his son had bonded with this woman who understood loss and healing in ways no one else could. The way Daniel smiled around her. Laughed. Thrived. Whatever doubts remained, whatever fears still whispered in the back of his mind, one truth was undeniable: Daniel needed Grace. And maybe Jonathan did too. "She's not leaving," Jonathan said firmly. "Grace is family now." Grace's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she smiled. "I promise, Daniel. I'm staying." Daniel finally relaxed, nestling between them. Within minutes, he was asleep again, one hand holding Jonathan's, the other clutching Grace's. They sat like that for a long time, Two broken adults watching over one resilient child. Finally, Jonathan spoke, his voice barely audible. I got an email today. About a medical trial. Gene therapy for childhood blindness. Experimental but promising. Grace's head snapped up. What? St. Augustine Medical Center. Dr. Harrison, the specialist I fired 2 years ago. He's running it. Jonathan's throat tightened. Grace, what if there's actually a chance? A real one this time? Grace stared at him, conflict warring across her face. Hope and terror in equal measure. What are you saying? Jonathan pulled a crumpled note from his pocket. He'd found it slipped under his office door that evening, unsigned, written in precise medical handwriting. New gene therapy trial. 12 spots available worldwide. Your son qualifies. Window closes in 48 hours. Come see me. Dr. H. I'm saying, Jonathan whispered, that maybe it's time to try again. But only if you think it's safe. Only if you'll be there with us. Grace looked down at Daniel sleeping peacefully between them. Then at the note. Then at Jonathan. Her expression was unreadable. 48 hours, she said finally. We need to research everything. Talk to Dr. Harrison. See the data. No blind faith this time. No desperation. Agreed. Grace stood, still holding Daniel's hand. Mr. Hartwell, if we do this, if we walk this road, I need you to understand something. This might not work. And if it doesn't, Daniel needs to know he's enough exactly as he is. Can you accept that? Jonathan looked at his son. Beautiful. Brave. Already perfect. Yes, he said. I can. Grace nodded and quietly left the room. Jonathan stayed beside Daniel's bed, watching his son sleep, turning the note over in his hands. 48 hours. 48 hours to decide whether to chase one more miracle or finally accept the one he already had. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Tick-tock, Mr. Hartwell. Other families want that spot. Make your choice. The waiting room at St. Augustine Medical Center smelled like antiseptic and desperation. Jonathan sat rigid in one of the plastic chairs, Daniel asleep in his arms, while Grace paced by the window. 24 hours had passed since that mysterious note. 24 hours of frantic research, phone calls to medical boards, digging through clinical trial databases. The gene therapy was real. Cutting edge. Revolutionary. And Dr. Harrison was running it. The same Dr. Harrison whom Jonathan had fired 2 years ago for telling him there was no hope. Mr. Hartwell. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Dar. Harrison will see you now. Jonathan's stomach twisted. He shifted Daniel carefully, the boy stirring but not waking. Grace moved to his side, her face unreadable. They followed the nurse down a sterile hallway into a consultation room. Dr. Harrison stood when they entered, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and tired eyes that had seen too many hopeless cases. Jonathan. Dr. Harrison's voice was measured. Professional. It's been a while. 2 years. Jonathan's jaw tightened. 2 years since you told me my son would never see. That I should stop wasting my time and money chasing miracles. I remember. Dr. Harrison gestured to the chairs. Please, sit. Jonathan remained standing. Why now? Why the sudden contact after all this time? Dr. Harrison pulled up a file on his computer screen. Because things have changed. Gene therapy for AIPL1-related childhood blindness has shown remarkable results in recent trials. 4 children in London gained significant vision improvements. We're launching a parallel study here in the States. 12 spots available. Your son qualifies. Grace stepped forward. What are the risks? Infection. Inflammation. Possible worsening of existing damage. Dr. Harrison's honesty was brutal. Or the therapy could fail entirely with no effect. But the potential benefits, partial vision restoration, light perception, possibly shape and color recognition, are significant. Jonathan's heart hammered against his ribs. You told me it was impossible. 2 years ago, it was. Dr. Harrison met his gaze squarely. The technology didn't exist. But science moves forward, Jonathan. I'm offering you a chance I couldn't offer before. Like and subscribe if you want to see what happens next. Why the urgency? Grace asked, her voice sharp. Why the anonymous note and the 48-hour deadline? Dr. Harrison's expression darkened. Because other families are desperate too. I have 70 applications for 12 spots. When I saw Daniel's name in our database, I knew I had to reach out directly. But if you don't commit soon, that spot goes to someone else. Jonathan looked down at Daniel, still sleeping peacefully in his arms. This beautiful boy who'd learned to navigate the world through sound and touch. Who laughed and played and thrived despite his blindness. What's the success rate? Jonathan asked. 80% show some improvement. 40% gain functional vision. 20% see minimal change. Dr. Harrison pulled up brain scans, charts, data that meant everything and nothing. But Jonathan, there's something else you need to know. The air in the room shifted. The trial requires psychological evaluation. Proof of a stable home environment. And because you share custody with your ex-wife, both parents must sign the consent forms. Jonathan's blood turned to ice. Both parents. Federal regulations for experimental treatment of minors. Non-negotiable. Grace's hand found Jonathan's shoulder, steadying him. Because they both knew what this meant. His ex-wife. The woman who'd walked away. Who sent birthday cards twice a year and refused to answer his calls. When was the last time you spoke to her? Dr. Harrison asked gently. 18 months. Jonathan's voice was hollow. She made it clear she wanted nothing to do with Daniel's medical care. Said she couldn't watch him suffer anymore. Then you need to convince her, Dr. Harrison said simply. Without her signature, Daniel can't participate. And you have 36 hours before this opportunity disappears. The room spun. Jonathan sank into a chair, Daniel still clutched against his chest. Grace knelt in front of him. We'll find her. We'll make her understand. She won't care. Jonathan's voice cracked. She stopped caring a long time ago. Then we make her care. Grace's eyes blazed with determination. For Daniel. We fight. Dr. Harrison stood. I'll give you privacy. But Jonathan. I need an answer by tomorrow at noon. After that, the spot goes to the next family on the list. He left the room. Jonathan sat in silence, holding his son, feeling the weight of an impossible choice crushing down on him. To pursue this chance meant facing the woman who'd abandoned them. Begging her to care about the son she'd walked away from. But what if she said no? I can find her, Grace said quietly. I have contacts. People who can track her down within hours. And then what? Jonathan looked up, eyes burning. What do I say to the woman who chose to leave rather than watch our son struggle? How do I convince her to sign a consent form for a treatment that might not even work? You tell her the truth. Grace's voice was fierce. That Daniel deserves every chance. That this isn't about her pain or your anger. It's about giving him the possibility of sight. Don't miss a second of this story, subscribe now. Jonathan's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. He opened it with shaking hands. I heard you're looking for me. His ex-wife. Somehow, she already knew. Meet me tomorrow. 10 a.m. Meridian Cafe downtown. Come alone. Jonathan showed Grace the message. Her face paled. How did she? I don't know. Jonathan stood, carefully adjusting Daniel in his arms. But she wants to talk. That's something. They left the hospital in silence. The drive home felt endless. Daniel woke up halfway there, asking sleepy questions about where they'd been. Jonathan couldn't find words that weren't lies. That night, after Daniel was asleep, Jonathan sat in his study staring at old photos on his computer. His wedding day. Daniel's birth. Family portraits from before everything fell apart. There was one photo he'd never deleted. His ex-wife holding newborn Daniel in the hospital, her face radiant with joy. Before the diagnosis. Before the surgeries. Before hope died and took their marriage with it. Grace knocked softly on the open door. Can't sleep. Can't stop thinking. Jonathan closed the laptop. What if she uses this as leverage? What if she demands something I can't give? Like what? Full custody. The words tasted like poison. What if she'll only sign the consent form if I give Daniel up entirely? Grace's expression hardened. She wouldn't. Wouldn't she? Jonathan's laugh was bitter. She left once. Who's to say what she'd do now? Grace sat in the chair across from him. Tomorrow, you'll meet her. You'll find out what she wants. And whatever happens, we'll face it together. I fired you 2 years ago, Jonathan said suddenly. Dr. Harrison. I fired him because I couldn't stand hearing that there was no hope. That I needed to accept Daniel's blindness. And now here he is, offering exactly what I've been desperate for. Life is strange that way, Grace said softly. What if this is a mistake? Jonathan's voice dropped to a whisper. What if we put Daniel through another surgery, another round of hope and disappointment, and it destroys him? Or what if it gives him sight? Grace countered. What if 10 years from now, Daniel looks at you with eyes that can actually see, and thanks you for taking this chance? Jonathan wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe that hope wasn't just another word for self-destruction. His phone buzzed again. Another text. By the way, I'm bringing my lawyer. You should too. His ex-wife wasn't playing games. This wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a negotiation. And Jonathan had a terrible feeling he already knew what price she'd demand. The custody papers sat on the cafe table between them like a loaded gun. Jonathan's ex-wife, Victoria, leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, watching him with eyes that had once looked at him with love but now held only cold calculation. 60 seconds, Jonathan. Her voice was flat. Sign it, and I'll approve the gene therapy. Refuse, and Daniel loses his only chance. Jonathan's hands trembled as he stared at the document. Full custody. Every holiday. Every birthday. Every milestone. She wanted it all, and she was using their son's blindness as leverage. You walked away. Jonathan's voice came out raw, barely controlled. 2 years ago, you packed your bags and left without saying goodbye to him. And now you want me to just hand him over? Victoria's jaw tightened. I left because I couldn't watch you destroy yourself chasing impossible cures. Because every day in that house felt like drowning. But I'm his mother, Jonathan. I have rights. Rights you abandoned. I needed space to heal. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. Do you know what it's like watching your child suffer? Knowing you carried him for 9 months, only to give him a life of darkness. Yes. Jonathan's voice broke. I know exactly what that's like. Because I stayed. I didn't run away when things got hard. Victoria flinched. For a moment, something like pain flickered across her face. Then it hardened again. 30 seconds. Jonathan looked at the papers. At the pen she placed deliberately beside them. One signature, and Daniel could have the surgery. One signature, and Jonathan would lose his son forever. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. No. Victoria's eyes widened. What? I said no. Jonathan grabbed his coat. You want to play games with our son's future? Fine. But I'm not giving him up. Not to you. Not to anyone. He walked out of the cafe, his phone already at his ear, calling his lawyer. Behind him, he heard Victoria shouting something, but the blood rushing in his ears drowned it out. If this story has you gripped, hit like and subscribe. The lawyer's office was downtown. Margaret Chen, sharp, ruthless, exactly who Jonathan needed. She listened to his explanation, her expression growing darker with each word. She's extorting you, Margaret said flatly. Using medical consent as leverage for custody. A judge would tear her apart. How long would that take? Emergency hearing? 3 days minimum. Maybe a week. Jonathan's stomach dropped. The trial deadline is tomorrow at noon. 18 hours. Margaret's silence was answer enough. Jonathan drove home in a daze. 18 hours. Not enough time for courts or lawyers or justice. Just enough time to watch Daniel's chance slip away to another family. Grace met him at the door, Daniel playing in the living room behind her. Her eyes searched his face. She said no. Worse. Jonathan collapsed onto the entryway bench. She said yes, but only if I sign over full custody. Grace's face went pale. That's extortion. I know. Jonathan buried his face in his hands. And there's nothing I can do about it. Not in 18 hours. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled her phone from her pocket. There might be. Jonathan looked up. What are you talking about? At the cafe. When Victoria demanded you come alone. I didn't listen. Grace's expression was grim. I sat 3 tables away. And I recorded everything. The world tilted. You what? Her demanding you sign custody papers in exchange for medical consent. Her exact words. All of it. Grace held up her phone. It's illegal to record without consent in this state. The recording would never hold up in court. But Jonathan, it's proof. Undeniable proof of what she's doing. Jonathan stood slowly. What are you suggesting? Send it to her. Let her know you have it. She'll have to back down. Grace's voice was steady, but her hands shook. Or you can leak it. Destroy her reputation. Make sure she never gets custody of Daniel or any other child ever again. The phone felt impossibly heavy in Jonathan's hand as Grace transferred the file. He could hear Victoria's voice clearly, sign it, and I'll approve the gene therapy. Refuse, and Daniel loses his only chance. Cold. Calculated. Damning. One click, and he could send it to her. Force her hand. Threaten to expose her unless she signed without conditions. One more click, and he could send it to media outlets. Bloggers. Parent advocacy groups. Watch her life implode in real time. She abandoned him, Jonathan said quietly. She doesn't deserve mercy. No, Grace agreed. She doesn't. Jonathan's thumb hovered over the send button. Then he thought of Daniel. Sweet, innocent Daniel, who still asked about his mother sometimes. Who kept the birthday cards she sent in a special box. Who didn't understand why mommy didn't visit anymore. If Jonathan destroyed Victoria, he'd have to explain it to Daniel someday. His son would grow up knowing his father had weaponized his mother's worst moment. I can't, Jonathan whispered. I can't do this to him. Grace nodded slowly. Then let me try something else. Don't miss what happens next, Like and subscribe now. That night, while Jonathan put Daniel to bed, Grace made a phone call. Jonathan didn't ask permission. Didn't even know about it until the next morning when his phone rang at 6 a.m. Victoria's number. "We need to talk," she said, her voice thick with tears. "In person. Now." They met at the same cafe. But this time, Victoria's lawyer wasn't there. Neither were the custody papers. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her eyes were red, her makeup smudged. "Grace called me last night," Victoria said without preamble. "She told me about her daughter. About Maya." Jonathan's breath caught. "She told me what it feels like to lose a child because you made a desperate choice. About living with that guilt every single day." Victoria's voice cracked. "And she asked me one question: is using Daniel as a bargaining chip worth becoming the kind of mother who traumatizes her son twice?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I left because I was terrified," Victoria whispered. "Terrified of watching another surgery fail. Another treatment go wrong. Another specialist tell us there's no hope. I couldn't survive it again, Jonathan. So I ran." "You ran from him," Jonathan said quietly. "From our son." "I know." Victoria's face crumpled. "And I've hated myself every day since. When Grace called, when she told me about losing Maya, I realized I've been so afraid of Daniel getting hurt that I've already hurt him in the worst way possible. By leaving." She pulled out a different document. A single page. "This is medical consent for the gene therapy trial. Unconditional. No custody demands. No leverage." Victoria slid it across the table. "But Jonathan, if this surgery breaks him, if it makes things worse, I'll never forgive you. Or myself." Jonathan took the paper with shaking hands. "Why the change?" "Because Grace made me see something." Victoria met his eyes. "She asked me what I wanted more: custody of a son who might resent me forever, or the chance to slowly rebuild trust with a son who might someday understand that I was broken too." Jonathan signed the consent form. So did Victoria. 14 hours before the deadline. Surgery was scheduled for the following week. That morning, Jonathan and Grace drove Daniel to St. Augustine Medical Center. Pre-op blood work. Final consultations. Daniel was nervous but excited, asking questions about whether he'd be able to see colors. "Maybe, buddy," Jonathan said, his throat tight. "Maybe." The nurse took Daniel's blood. Routine procedure. Just a precaution. Jonathan sat with Grace in the waiting area, watching Daniel color with textured crayons at the children's table. Hope felt dangerous. Fragile. But it was there. Then the anesthesiologist appeared in the doorway, her face grave. "Mr. Hartwell. Can I speak with you?" Jonathan's heart stopped. He followed her into a private consultation room, Grace right behind him. "We can't proceed with the surgery," the doctor said without preamble. "Your son's white blood cell count is critically elevated. He has a serious infection somewhere in his system." The room spun. "What does that mean?" Jonathan's voice sounded far away. "It means we need to run more tests immediately. If we proceed with surgery while he's fighting an infection, the immunosuppressants required for gene therapy could be fatal." Grace grabbed Jonathan's arm, her voice cracking. "No. Not now. Not when we're this close." But the doctor's expression was final. "The surgery is postponed indefinitely. Until we identify and treat the infection." "I'm sorry." Jonathan looked through the observation window at Daniel, still coloring peacefully, unaware that his chance at sight had just been ripped away. Or that something far more dangerous was growing inside him. Jonathan's knees gave out in the hospital corridor. He hit the floor hard, Grace's arms the only thing keeping him from shattering completely. "Mr. Hartwell, we need to admit Daniel immediately," the doctor was saying, but the words sounded underwater. Distant. Unreal. The infection could be anywhere, bloodstream, organs, we won't know until we run comprehensive tests. This wasn't supposed to happen. They'd fought so hard. Overcome so much. The gene therapy was supposed to be the miracle, not the beginning of something worse. Grace helped Jonathan to his feet. Through the observation window, he could see nurses already surrounding Daniel, checking vitals, preparing him for transport to the pediatric ICU. His son looked so small on that examination table. So fragile. He was fine this morning, Jonathan whispered. He was laughing. Happy. How did we not know? Infections in children can escalate rapidly, the doctor explained. The elevated white blood cell count suggests his body's been fighting something for days, possibly weeks. We need to find the source before it becomes septic. The word septic hit Jonathan like a physical blow. He thought of Grace's daughter, Maya. Dead from sepsis at age 6 after an experimental treatment. History repeating itself in the cruelest possible way. Within an hour, Daniel was in the ICU, hooked up to monitors and 4 lines, pumped full of broad-spectrum antibiotics while doctors scrambled to identify what was attacking his system. Blood cultures. Imaging scans. Tests with names Jonathan couldn't pronounce. Grace refused to leave. She pulled a chair into the corner of Daniel's room and sat there like a sentinel, her lips moving in silent prayer, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles went white. Jonathan called Victoria. She answered on the first ring. He's sick, Jonathan said, his voice breaking. Really sick. They don't know what's wrong yet, but, Victoria, you need to come. She arrived 2 hours later, still in her work clothes, mascara running down her face. When she saw Daniel, unconscious, fever-flushed, so still, she made a sound like something dying. I should never have signed those papers, Victoria whispered. What if agreeing to the surgery triggered this? What if I killed him? You didn't. Grace stood, moving toward Victoria with surprising gentleness. Infections don't work that way. This isn't your fault. Victoria looked at Grace, this woman she'd resented, feared, accused of manipulation. How do you stay so calm? After losing Maya, how are you not terrified? I am terrified, Grace admitted. But terror doesn't help Daniel. Faith does. If this story is breaking your heart, like and subscribe. The first night was endless. Daniel's fever spiked to 104 degrees despite the medications. Doctors ordered more aggressive interventions, stronger antibiotics, ice baths, constant monitoring. Jonathan and Victoria sat on opposite sides of Daniel's bed, each holding one small hand, united in fear if nothing else. Grace stayed in the waiting room, sleeping in short bursts on uncomfortable plastic chairs, waking to pray in that mysterious language Jonathan still didn't understand. On the second day, doctors found the source, a severe kidney infection, complicated by an immune response that had spread inflammation throughout his body. They inserted a catheter, started different medications, warned that organ damage was possible. Jonathan watched his son fight for each breath and felt something inside him break that had nothing to do with blindness or gene therapy or any of the things he'd been obsessing over for years. All he wanted was for Daniel to survive. To wake up. To laugh again. Nothing else mattered. Not sight. Not miracles. Just life. Victoria broke down on the third night, sobbing in the hallway while Jonathan held her like he used to when they were still married. When they still believed love could conquer anything. I wasted 2 years, Victoria choked out. 2 years I could have spent with him. What if I never get another chance? You will, Jonathan said, though he didn't know if he believed it. You will. Grace found them there. She didn't say anything, just stood with them, a quiet presence that somehow made the unbearable slightly more bearable. Then, just after midnight on the third night, something shifted. Daniel's fever broke. Suddenly, dramatically, his temperature dropping from 103 to 99 in less than an hour. His breathing eased. Color returned to his cheeks. The doctors called it remarkable. Unexpected. The antibiotics working faster than anticipated, they said, combined with a strong immune response. Grace called it grace. Daniel woke up the next morning, weak but alert, asking for water and his dinosaur mug. Victoria cried so hard she had to leave the room. Jonathan just held his son, breathing in the scent of hospital soap and survival, grateful in ways he'd never been grateful for anything. Don't miss the ending, hit that subscribe button now. 6 weeks later, they were back at St. Augustine Medical Center. Different circumstances this time. Daniel's infection cleared, his system stable, his body ready. Dr. Harrison reviewed the updated scans with cautious optimism. We can proceed. But I want to be clear, after everything his body's been through, the success rate may be lower. He's already beaten one major health crisis. We're asking him to undergo major surgery on top of that. What does Daniel want? Grace asked quietly. Everyone turned to look at the boy sitting on the examination table, swinging his legs, tracing the raised dinosaurs on his favorite mug. Daniel, Jonathan knelt beside him. Do you want to do the surgery? It's your choice, buddy. Nobody else's. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, will it hurt? A little, Jonathan said honestly. But we'll be right there when you wake up. Will I see you? Daniel's voice was small. Hopeful. Maybe, Jonathan said, his throat closing. Maybe not completely. But either way, we'll still be here. Daniel nodded slowly. Then I want to try. The surgery took 8 hours. Gene therapy delivered via precise injections to the retina, healthy copies of the AIPL1 gene packaged in a harmless virus, targeting the dying photoreceptor cells with microscopic precision. Jonathan, Victoria, and Grace waited together, forming an unlikely family bound by love for one small boy. When Dr. Harrison finally emerged, his expression was carefully neutral. The procedure went well. No complications. Now we wait. Recovery took weeks. The improvements came gradually, so gradually Jonathan almost missed them at first. Daniel noticing when someone turned on a lamp. Tracking movement near his face. Reaching for objects he couldn't have seen before. 3 months post-surgery, during a routine follow-up, Daniel looked directly at Jonathan and said, "Daddy, you're wearing blue." Jonathan's world stopped. "Can you see it?" he whispered. "Not like regular," Daniel said carefully, the way a 4-year-old describes the indescribable. "But I can see shapes. And light. And some colors if they're bright." He smiled. "Blue is my favorite. It's happy. Not full vision. Not perfect sight. But enough. Enough to see his father's face for the first time. Enough to watch Grace move around the room. Enough to see his mother smile through tears. Enough to change everything." 1 year later, Daniel ran through the tactile garden Grace had expanded in their backyard, still using his white cane, still touching plants to identify them, but now able to see the sunlight filtering through leaves, the bright colors of flowers, the shapes of butterflies dancing past. He still saw the world differently than most children. Would always need accommodations, tools, support. But he was thriving in ways that had nothing to do with medical interventions and everything to do with being loved exactly as he was. Jonathan and Victoria co-parented peacefully now, old wounds healing slowly but surely. Grace had become family, not staff, not employee, but the person who taught them all what it meant to have faith in the face of impossible odds. One evening, as Jonathan tucked Daniel into bed, his son reached up and traced his father's face with small fingers, the same way he'd done since infancy, mapping features through touch. "This is the ending you've been waiting for, like and subscribe." "I always knew what you looked like, Daddy," Daniel whispered. "I just needed to see it with my hands first." But now I get to see you both ways. That's pretty cool. Jonathan pressed his forehead against his son's, tears streaming down his face. Grace had been right all along. Daniel had never been broken. Never been incomplete. Never been anything less than perfect. He'd just been waiting for everyone else to truly see him. And now, finally, they did.